Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. A new season, Season 5, Episode 1, Happy New Year to one and all. I'm very optimistic about the year of our Lord 2025, and that may be because I'm looking outside of my window. It's a cloudless sky and it's 76 degrees. I hope that's the weather that you're enjoying wherever you are. I know it's not. You can celebrate with me. How are we starting off the new year? Well, dear listener, it's clear. And it was made clear by way of this horrible incident, this act of cowardice on New Year's Eve, well, technically New Year's Day in New Orleans, but more specifically, law enforcement's reaction to it, and then this bizarre, I think that's the best word for it, this bizarre press conference that was given by different members of law enforcement agencies and politicians as well. It just illustrated that these people were not on the same page, did not know what the hell was going on, and it just dawned on me that we have this perception of what our society is like, the foundation of it being these technological advances that we think are, frankly, the bedrock of a newer and better world. And these devices make us dumber. That's right. Your phone makes you dumber. Your computer makes you dumber. Your car makes you dumber. And this is less a condemnation and more a call for awareness. And Ohio State looks poised to demolish everyone in the college football playoff series. Where has this Ohio State team been? Thank you all for listening. I do appreciate it. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. If you like what you hear, note that it is ad-free. Please consider supporting the podcast so we can keep it that way. This Is Why I Don't Vote is on Patreon. All right, let's go.
Act 1. The technology that we hold as the bedrock of modern society makes us dumber, not smarter.
I had a whole piece that I had put together as part of the first episode of a new season, a New Year's resolution, focusing on me, not on the outside world, focusing on me and trying to be less judgmental in the way that I analyze the world and the way that I approach this podcast, that I communicate ideas. And then we have this tragedy in New Orleans in anticipation of New Year's and the Sugar Bowl, the college playoff game, where some jackass just takes a truck and is able to drive it into crowds of people. In my notes, I actually had written out surpassing any kind of barricade, and it turns out there weren't any barricades put up, strangely enough, to these very open and obvious streets that if somebody wanted to get down there and do damage, these would be the access points. You think these streets would be blocked off. And in all the different ways that I could approach this story, in light of my New Year's resolution, try to be less judgmental, I have to focus on the technology. And not saying this in a damning way, it's on us, it's on the public to realize that this technology that we all feel like has empowered not only our individual lives, but our families' lives, and empowered our communities and our states and the government. Watching some of these meme videos on social media, it's pretty fun. And these songs that people come up with, and now they're using AI to mimic the voice of different coaches in different sports, and they say these comical things after wins or losses. It's all pretty fun. And yet, we look at this technology, and we're being told, and I think that we fundamentally are accepting that this is the bulwark of how our society works, how we are able to operate in society. We accept that there are cameras everywhere recording us. We accept that our phone as a device is listening to us, is watching our every move in order to not only market to us products that we want to buy, keep tabs on us about where we go and when, monitor our likes and dislikes in order to sometimes sell us stuff, but sometimes influence the way that we think. So we may perceive an issue one way, and vis-a-vis the things that we watch, that we listen to, that we're fed on social media, we form a different opinion. We're all becoming more and more comfortable with this idea. So when an incident like New Orleans happens, we expect that law enforcement is going to be able to identify who the culprit is, what the motivations of that culprit are, and bring that person to justice in short order. It's the exact same thing that I spoke about with this Mangione kid who assassinated this United Healthcare CEO. We expect that as part of this social contract with technology, why would we have all of these technological advances if we're still doing things the way that we did them 100 or 200 years ago? It's just reinforcing in my mind when you look at what happened in New Orleans and you look at the response by law enforcement, and then you look at the press conference that these law enforcement agencies had after the incident in order to inform the public, hey, this is what happened and this is what we're doing about it. It's clear to me, and I hope it is to you, dear listener, that technology isn't going to bridge the gaps of what amounts to nothing more than incompetence. If someone doesn't put up a barricade to a road that is easily, and when I say easily, within sight, that you can just look down the road and see mass crowds of people. If you're not going to barricade that road in order to protect people packed elbow to asshole on these busy streets, drinking, of course, what technological implement are you going to put in place of that? We are not in the position where we are going to have a Jetson-style society where everything is automated by computers and that these oversights by these fallible human minds are going to be compensated through the use of this technology. These phones, our devices, our tablets, they are not akin to the wheel. And I want to make that very clear. I want to make this analogy so that everyone understands what I'm trying to say. These technologies that we have today, these electronic technologies that do a very good job at making it easier for us to communicate with people, to memorialize things, because that's really what we're doing. We're able to send these emails, we're able to send texts, we can manipulate documents. We may be able to push more paper. We may be able to communicate in much more advanced, intelligent ways than we ever have before in the course of human history. But ours is not a crisis of labor in the 21st century. It is a crisis of critical thinking. Let me repeat. Ours is not a crisis of labor in the 21st century. It is a crisis of critical thinking. Why was the wheel so important? It cut down on the time for labor, for travel, significantly, such that we could become, as a human being, critical thinkers. You didn't have to spend so much time in labor to accomplish so many tasks. And that's what we've seen in the advancement of technology, that it makes us a more efficient animal. And then what can we do given these efficiencies that no other animal can accomplish? We can start to use our mind. Then we become more efficient thinkers. So I pose the question to you, dear listener. In light of everything that we've seen over the course of, let's say, the last 4 or 5 years, including COVID, the way all that went down, the information that we were given, the information that inevitably came out, how we've seen governments respond to all of these different issues that we're facing today, how we've seen people respond to all of the inputs and the outputs that they have to face in daily life. Do these devices, do our phones, do our tablets, do our computers, do they make us better critical thinkers? This is not a rhetorical question. Everybody's going to answer it the same way. No, they don't make us better critical thinkers. In fact, they make us dumber. It's likely the most advanced piece of technology that's ever come out in the course of human history, and yet it's the first piece of technology that makes you dumber using it than if you had not used it. Look at the FBI's response to this guy driving that truck into the crowd of partygoers on New Year's Eve. Technically New Year's Day, it was 3 a.m. Within, 6-8 hours, you have people who were reviewing the video release a statement to the public that this was a coordinated attack, and there may be other people who were in those crowds who were part of a coordinated plan to hurt people on Bourbon Street, Place that into the proper context, dear listener. That very day, there was a bowl game at the Sugar Bowl, the Superdome, for the college football playoff between Notre Dame and Georgia. So you have the FBI coming out saying, hey, there was this incident. There are additional actors that may be out there lurking. Of course, that's the implication, lurking around, who may want to do more harm. And here we have this massive event that's going on later on in the day. Then you have this press conference where you have all these different law enforcement officials. You even have the senator from the state of Louisiana, Kennedy, at this press conference. None of them are on the same page. Some of them talk over one another. It looks like there is some interpersonal animosity based on the information that had been gathered and released up and into that point. And then there's this retraction. Well, yeah, we looked at the video. We thought that there may be people who were part of a coordinated plan. And now it looks like after re-reviewing the video, no, that's not the case at all. And it looks like this is just an isolated incident from a lone wolf. Now, some of you may be thinking to yourselves, this isn't so much a crisis of technology, it is a crisis of critical thinking. And if you give an idiot technology, what can you expect from that idiot? It's not the technology, it's not the device, it's not the software, it's not the system, it's the idiot themselves. Fair point, but it begs then the next question. What's the point of technology if it's only wielded by idiots? Should the technology itself, by its application, by wielding it, not make us less idiotic? You see a bunch of buffoons at a press conference after a tragedy, and you think to yourself, is this the year 2025? Or is this the year 1825? Or 1625? If you can't answer that question by way of the response of these parties and only by the nature of their dress, perhaps we need to reevaluate our expectations of how technology has been woven into our modern society and whether or not we are just pretty simplistic apes banging on what are no more than highly technologically advanced hammers. I'm going to make a quick analogy to try to wrap this up. I love the Premier League. I love Newcastle. I've talked about it on the podcast. The Premier League employs a video review technology in order to determine goals, in order to determine handballs or fouls. The NFL employs replay. College football employs replay. They use it all the time. Did a player make a catch inbounds or out of bounds? Was the ball touching the ground? Personal fouls, targeting. If you watch sports at all, you've been in these situations where there is a long replay. The officials are going over a review and they come to a conclusion that after watching the video, you have no idea how they reached that conclusion. You can't believe that looking at the same video that you were looking at, these officials reached the conclusion that they did. Our law enforcement agencies are relying on the same technology, and the same issue exists when it comes to what they're looking at. They're fallible just like we are. They're human beings just like we are. It never dawns on us that if there's a law enforcement agent watching a video of something going on, that law enforcement agent could misinterpret what was happening with his own two eyes, with her own two eyes, and yet we see it happen on a weekly basis based on the sporting events that we love, so much so that we discount now what's going to happen after a replay review. I promise you, I'm not going to start fires now by rubbing two sticks together. I'm not going to travel from point A to point B by beating my own 2 feet. Yes, I'm still going to embrace technology. My New Year's resolution is to understand, and I'm using this word intentionally, appreciate the extent to which our reliance on technology and our belief in its capacity to make our lives better is a sales pitch. It's effective marketing. If that's the case, then should we get but so upset when the results of that marketing campaign fail to deliver? Can I be bold enough to, instead of picking my phone up again, can I at that moment be self-aware that this device could very well be making me dumber even though it may be the most advanced piece of technology that any human being has laid hands on in the course of human history. With that awareness in mind, what am I about to do with these two opposable thumbs and this stupidity device? Judge another? Judge the outcome of a situation? Volunteer as much to the world? We shall see, because this time capsule that I call a podcast memorializes my either progression or regression when it comes to articulating the way that I see the world. If halfway through the season you think to yourself, wow, this is some of the most profound stuff that I've heard this guy talk about since he started the podcast, it may very well be because I have maintained the self-awareness necessary to realize that this device that I often love so much, and I say that only because of the amount of attention that I give it, makes me dumber.
Act 2. Where has this Ohio State team been?
If you consistently score on your first 3 or 4 offensive possessions, you aren't going to be in many close games. It's not so much that the other team has the pressure now on their defense, it's the pressure on their offense. The fact that they need to start putting up points in the first quarter, and they start to press, and then your defense could start keying on the pass, making your defense one-dimensional. The offense is now one-dimensional, your defense can be one-dimensional. And before you know it, you've got yourself a blowout in the second quarter of a football game. These Ohio State Buckeyes have done this now twice in the college football playoff, once to Tennessee at home, which I thought, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's at night, they're at home, crowd going wild, it's cold as a witch's tit. Don't think I won't go 70s on you. 70s colloquialisms. I may have been able to get away with that in the 80s as well. Night game, at home, cold. Ohio State runs away with it. Going on a neutral field in a warmer weather against an Oregon team that likes to play fast, so a warmer climate, that's going to favor the Ducks offense, and Ohio State blows them out in the first half. It was academic in the second half to see if Oregon could make it close. I'm sure 90% of the households who had that game on in the second half had it on in the background. People had already tuned out because the outcome was certain. So Ohio State will now face Texas in the semifinal, a Texas team that started out very strong against Arizona State and allowed Arizona State to get back into that game by making some pretty silly mistakes. A turnover late in the game, missing 2 very makeable field goals for their field goal kicker. Yet when their backs were against it, so to speak, it was 4th down in overtime, and Texas needed a score on a 4th, and I believe it was 9 or 4th and 13. Arizona State blitzes practically everybody in the backfield. Arizona State doesn't get one guy close to the quarterback. Touchdown Texas, and from there, Texas just ran away with it. Quick aside, it is a dagger the way they do this overtime, where if you have the ball first, you go down and score, your defense then is unable to stop the other team, they score, and that team gets the first possession. That offense has a lot of momentum. They just went down and scored a touchdown. Then they get a chance to run their offense again, and it really puts the team that gets the ball first at a disadvantage. Yes, you get the ball first. You know whether or not your defense needs to hold the other team to a 7 or a 3. But if your defense doesn't hold, that offense that just scored gets the ball back and gets to go and attempt to score again. And that's exactly what Texas did on one play in the second overtime. And unfortunately, Arizona State wasn't able to match them. Of course, I say unfortunately being a resident of the Valley of the Sun. So we have Arizona State out, Texas in, Texas playing this Ohio State team that seems to be on this unstoppable roll. So what does Texas have to do? I don't think Texas is going to be able to go out and say, well, we're going to do this on defense, and that's what's going to be dispositive in this game. Texas is going to need to score a lot of points. Texas is going to need to put pressure on Ohio State's defense by scoring. They did just that against Arizona State at the beginning of the game, and Arizona State's defense was able to settle down and stop Texas so that it could get back into the game by way of a turnover and then the offense actually waking up at the end of the third and then into the fourth quarter. If Texas plays the same way against Ohio State that they played against Arizona State, they're going to get their asses kicked, plain and simple. Perhaps Arizona State's offense will have cooled off by the time they play Texas, but I don't see it. If you have this kind of momentum in the playoffs against two high-caliber defenses, again, statistically, Tennessee's defense was very good, and statistically, Oregon's defense was one of the best in the Big Ten. This game, if Texas is going to win, is going to be a lot like some of those SEC games that you had against LSU and Alabama. LSU was marching up and down the field. Alabama's marching up and down the field. Same thing with Alabama and Ole Miss. Both teams scoring practically at will, and it was going to be which defense could come up and make one or two plays, namely a turnover, to turn the tide of that type of game. It's Ohio State's tournament to win. I don't know that Penn State or Notre Dame is going to be able to slow down Ohio State. I give Penn State a slight advantage to the extent that either of those teams can compete with Ohio State because Penn State played them very well. Penn State knows that team very well, having had played them earlier this season and those two being on each other's schedule for the last few seasons. But you can't say it was the same Ohio State team that showed up in Happy Valley that is now showing up in these other games. This is a completely different type of offense, one that doesn't seem to be missing anything. Everything is clicking right now. The quarterback is seeing the field well. He's throwing the ball well. The offensive line is blocking well, both on runs and on pass protection. You've got wide receivers, tight ends, and running backs that are all NFL caliber talent. No coach can predict this, and you certainly can't coach for it, to be playing your best at the end of the season. And by way of the last game of the regular season for Ohio State, not only did they not look like they were playing their best, if it had been last year, they wouldn't have made the playoff. Losing to Michigan at home would have knocked them out. I don't think that there's anything that would make up for the fact that Ohio State has now lost the last 4 to one Michigan Wolverines, but for a national championship. And I believe that Ohio State now is poised to win that national championship, saving Ryan Day's job, and at least giving Ohio State fan the retort, well, at least we won the national championship, to all of the shit they're going to have to eat for not being able to beat Michigan. This is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast.